So let's talk about a tale of two Cheltenhams. On one side, we have the Betfair ambassador, somebody that is heavily promoted at preview evenings, emails out every day about their selections, access to all sorts of information, huge amounts of publicity. And on the other side, you have me, somebody that's working really hard to try and do their absolute best at Cheltenham, has a very good track record and is trying to do that impossible thing of winning on every single race at Cheltenham. You couldn't have a more contrasting story. I've been successfully betting and trading for over 2 decades. If you want more videos like this and you want me to describe more of what I do, then give us a like. If you want to talk to like-minded people, visit the BetAngel forum where you can do exactly that, but also visit our website where you can download a free trial of BetAngel. So before Cheltenham, I did a few familiar things, and one of them was writing to all of the media outlets to talk about the sort of stuff that I do. I wrote to At the Races, Racing TV, ITV Racing, Racing Post. I could go on. I wrote, I can't remember how many it is. I think it's maybe somewhere between 30 and 50. In a quiet year, I may only write to 30, and in a busy year, I'll try and do more of that. But I wrote to all of them and I basically said, hey, look, we're all into racing. We all love racing. But here's a different thing that I do that you may be interested in. I'm going to try and win on every single race at Cheltenham. I don't know if I can do it, but you may be interested in what I'm trying to do. And it's a different angle. It appeals to a different audience. And, we use all sorts of modern stuff to do that. And thought this may be of interest to you. Please let me know. Thank you very much, Peter. And of course, do you know how many replies I got from all of that correspondence, which was written and via email? As you can probably guess, the answer was 0. Nobody bothered to reply to me. Nobody even gave me the courtesy of saying thanks, but this isn't really what we're interested in. I never ever get a reply. And there are a number of reasons for this, which we'll cover in a second. But however, they will continue to promote tipsters, and they're saying, oh, look at this, and here's my angle on that, and blah, 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 blah. Now, when I've been asked to write about stuff in the past, very often what they want is a thing called actionable content. They want something that people will act upon, which of course you can do with trading. But typically what that means is they just want, the shortest gap between somebody having a thought and actually placing a bet. And that inevitably ends up with tipsters. People just saying, back this, back that, back this, back that. They don't even say lay this or try this. It never, ever happens. And many years ago, you can see why tipsters existed. But nowadays, of course, if you've got an opinion on something, there are no restrictions. You won't get banned or anything. And if you think you've got a price that represents value, you just go on the exchange, put as much money on that you feel was prudent, and put your money where your mouth is. But of course, I really doubt whether many of these people do that. So the big question is, why do I get blanked every Cheltenham? So there's one thing that sits deeply uncomfortably with me about the betting industry, and that is that fundamentally speaking, it's funded by losers. Now, I am talking about traditional betting here because we've got bookmakers and sports books over here. And if they win, you lose. And if you win, they lose. So obviously, they're going to not want you to win as much as possible. And I'm sure you've seen all of the stuff on social media. Sometimes they resort to very unusual tactics, shall we say, to avoid a payout on a big win, invoking clauses without clarification, just so that they can avoid paying out and balancing their books that way. When in fact, really, they should be balancing it through the odds, and it's a whole different discussion, really, isn't it? But fundamentally speaking, a lot of these types of bookmakers will employ tipsters and people to give advice purely on the basis that it will help them get customers to place a bet. And because the odds are stacked heavily in their favour, they know that if a customer places a bet, they're going to get a big chunk of that money one way or another. So there's no qualification of who these people are or what track record that they have. They just want people to have an opinion. That's fundamentally what they're doing. They want somebody to sort of say blah, 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 blah. And then somebody will look at it and go, yeah, actually, that's an interesting angle. Here's my tenner. And that's typically why you see tipsters promoted in this particular manner. They're trying to stimulate people to have a bet. Now, there is a good or a better model when you're betting. And in fact, there are two really, because if we look at the Tote, for example, the Tote will let you win. There's no restriction on you losing, because the way that the Tote works is they basically have a large pool of money that people bet into. They take a deduction from that and then share the profit amongst the winners. they won't ban you if you win, because it's an irrelevance for their business model. And the same goes for an exchange as well, because, you know, inevitably you're going to have winners and losers on an exchange. But fundamentally speaking, though, those winnings are where the exchange gets its money, because they effectively take a cut of those winnings, and that's where they make their money. But there are no restrictions. There's no incentive for them to ban you or restrict you in any way if you win, simply because the money's there. They just take a little cut of that, and it makes no real difference to their business model. They really want to drive money into the exchange, because that way they would get more money. But here's the problem. If you're on an exchange, they only take 2% of those winnings, excluding all of the additional detail that I could talk about. But fundamentally, you know, that's quite a small slither. So if you're trying to drive somebody to one product or another, they'll lose a lot faster if they use a traditional betting method. And people running that traditional betting method would make a lot more money than if they do it on an exchange. So when we get to the crux of this issue, and you sort of say, well, you know, why don't people promote some of the ideas that I've got? What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to teach you and many other people that if you use an exchange, that gap to profitability, your ability to make money, the slither is quite small, so you can get over that. It doesn't mean that you will or that you're guaranteed to make money, but your chance of doing it on an exchange is much, much higher than with a traditional sportsbook. But of course, that doesn't work particularly in the favour of these corporations, because they want you to lose money as fast as possible, not as slowly as possible. And fundamentally speaking, that's why you find that while lots of people get promoted, people like me that are trying to actually give you advice that will get you to that particular stage, just don't get any promotion whatsoever. So here we come to a slightly uncomfortable part of the video, which you'll understand in a second. I did win on all 27 races at Cheltenham, and that just shows how effective what it is that I do. But it also, there is a skill element here. I've been doing this for a large number of years. You shouldn't go into it expecting to win on all 27. That's hopelessly unrealistic. And of course, you can lose money through trading. It's not a one-way street to profitability. It's just that it's a really, really good way of profiting from your knowledge of sport. But contrast that to the absolute nightmare that Tony Calvin had, who was a lead ambassador for Betfair, who did a large number of tips at the Cheltenham Festival, who successfully found absolutely zero winners at the Cheltenham Festival. But of course, you know, he was heavily promoted before and during Cheltenham, whereas I got absolutely no publicity whatsoever. And okay, you know, I'm simplifying things here, but I do feel a little bit sorry for Tony, because he sort of did the right thing in that he was going for much larger odds on individual horses. And that's more likely, in my experience, where you're going to find a little bit of value. And it's also an impossibly hard game to have such a high public profile and to tip, because if you back something at a high odds and it comes in and you make a profit over the course of the week, everybody going, oh, he was just lucky, you know, he just found, you know, no, but you can't find that every week. If he decided to go at very, very short odds, people were going, well, that was pretty obvious. It's bound to win, that was. And if he had an absolute nightmare, which is exactly what happened, then people would go, oh, you absolute idiot, you're useless. So I don't think you can win. It's a really, really tough game to be able to have such a high public profile and to tip, because your mind is caught between all of these things. You know you need to have an impactful bet, but if you want to try and win, you need to choose higher odds. But if you do that, you could have a possible mare, and if you go at short odds, and you know, so I think actually it's a very, very tough thing to do. So I'm not saying anything other than that here, really. I just wanted to contrast my experience of what happened at Cheltenham with somebody that was heavily promoted. So one of the key reasons that people are promoting in this manner is simply because they want to stimulate activity. They want you to have a bet. It doesn't matter if they've got absolutely zero track record, they've got no interesting angles or no sort of, you know, they just, it would be interesting actually to have a look and see what track record they've got. But fundamentally what they're trying to do is get an opinion from you. They say, I'm going to do this for this reason. And you'll either go, well, I totally disagree and I prefer to bet on this. Or you would go, well, that's an interesting, I'll have a bet on that. And that's fundamentally what they're trying to do. In terms of doing anything, you know, when you look at what I do, okay, it's very different and so on, but it appeals to a different audience. I still think it should be promoted because you've got people trying to trade Forex, equities or crypto. And this is sort of similar to that. Or if you're into traditional betting, of course, you can completely automate what you do. You can look for interesting angles there. and it's a whole different subset of the industry. It's, you know, it's a little bit cleverer than that betting on a hunch, but fundamentally speaking, you know, that's a whole sector into itself that you could grow fairly significantly, because, you know, the angle is going to be completely different from what you do with a traditional betting pattern. But fundamentally speaking, that's why you don't see me getting promoted, because they make more money from other products. They make significantly less money from the sort of thing that I do, and it just pays for them to promote in that particular manner. I'm going to ask them all again on the Grand National and the Derby if they want to do any coverage of this, because it's an interesting angle and people should know about it. But I bet you that when I approach them, exactly the same thing's going to happen. I'm just going to get completely blanked, which is a shame, because fundamentally speaking, if you're interested in really doing this seriously and you want to stand the best chance of profiting, I know exactly the way that you should do it. And it would be nice if they would actually give me the opportunity to talk about it.